This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filio. We're back with Paulo Souza this week.
Hi, Joel. How are you?
Good. Are you ready to do the Kona Breakdown?
As painful as that might be for me, yes, let's do it.
Well, we've followed online, I'm sure, the Ironman Live. Kona, they actually do a decent job of the video, I think, although we could get into how much time they spent on men versus women and the leaders versus anyone else. I think there's probably some criticisms there. But without saying anything about the commentary, I suppose we just go into the performances, since that's what we really were interested in. And we had both of the favorites winning, but in pretty different ways. What is your quick take on the men's race, if we start there? Frodeno versus Keinle. Surprises? Any surprises there? Maybe I saw on Twitter, maybe you weren't convinced that Keinle's strategy starting the run was the best one, but we don't have to start there. We can go backwards.
Yeah, I thought it was like, even if the end result was the favorite winning the race, I thought it was a very interesting. I thought it was a very interesting race from the men's side. We ended up having a hard bike, particularly coming up to Avi, and then coming down, and in the end, like the main players were just waiting for the run, and I think a big decisive factor was like the comment I made on Twitter. I thought that along with the way Keinle raced the run at 70.3 Worlds, I thought that I don't know if he lacks experience or if it's just his style, but I thought that he was a little rattled at the beginning of the run. First, making a big effort to catch up to Jan Frodeno, and then chatting with Jan Frodeno, then all through Ali Drive, getting dropped and getting back on, then being on the wrong side of the aid station tables, then on the right side. I thought he was a little he just came across a little bit as rattled and maybe not entirely in his favor, because I thought that even when we were looking at Frodeno running side by side with Keinle, it was pretty clear that Jan was the guy in control. But I don't think that Jan had a lot in the tank to do this race, and perhaps Keinle with a smarter approach might have been more of a factor in the race.
So is it a matter of like that, racing your own race versus racing the field? Like, how do you do that differently? Is he got to start a bit more slowly, more patiently, or is it a matter of not getting caught up in it? Yeah.
In Ironman running, the deciding factor is who slows down less in the last, let's say 10 miles or 10K of the run, and that's when the deciding part of the race is going to happen, and anything that happens in the beginning of the run is not going to have a lot of impact on the overall race. So I thought that there were a lot of fireworks coming from Keinle right at the beginning, and perhaps he paid for it with not being in the discussion for the race. But but then when they cross the finish line and you see the differences, the time differences and all that, then maybe all these points are moot, and Jan was for sure the best athlete on the day.
Indeed, and I mean, backing up just from the swim, it was a pretty fast swim generally. The field swam pretty fast. We talked about that. Or also, you made a comment on Twitter about the relative swim
Well, it was
times.
interesting. it was interesting that like a week before the race, there's always a swim on the swim course, and right after the race, a lot of people had their GPS data, and it seemed that the turnaround points were closer this year than in other years, and the times were definitely faster for that swim, and then on race day, it seemed that they were using the same course they'll be shorter. I got the impression that, and I haven't looked at the GPS data from the actual race, but I got the impression that the swim this year was like the course was shorter than previous years, and but on top of that, the conditions were also a little easier. I don't think there was a lot of chop or swell that usually comes in, so definitely made it for faster swim times.
And I read afterwards, and I don't know the outcome of this, but there was sort of a mini Dirty Harry controversy again about the British athlete.
Yes, that was
Harry Wilshire, who
apparently, yeah, Harry Wilshire once again just living it up to his nickname of Dirty Harry, and apparently he just sprinted past everyone. Well, Jan Frodeno complained that he was like hitting him for the whole swim. And then at the end, he just sprinted past everyone to be the first out of the water. So Dirty Harry strikes again, which it's not surprising if you remember the original Dirty Harry movies. Sure. There were like three or four of them. So we can expect the Dirty Harry to appear maybe a couple more times with his let's call it antics.
Sure. And of course, there's typically, I mean, an athlete like Wilshire would have some sort of swim bonus lined up for being first out of the water, and second means nothing really. So he really wanted that, but questionable behavior. But once again, we saw really a huge front group, and really set the tone for the ride, with a pretty huge group for quite a long time until it started to spread out. But looking quickly at the results, it looks like there's 3 in the top 10 that weren't in that group, and you've got to go down in the top 15. Only 5 were not really in that front group. So I mean, again, it's showing you've got to swim, and the energy that some of the guys spend chasing to catch on to that group is significant. I mean, and that was really you'd have to imagine that's a differentiator between Keinle and Frodeno as well. While Keinle was able to get across relatively soon, he had to make up a gap of really 4 minutes. And ultimately that's also the difference on the run, but you have to imagine the cost of that on the whole race.
Mm-hmm. Another factor were the penalties, and at least 2 guys in the top 10 got 4-minute penalties. Patrick Lang, which was third, and I think Frederik van Lier, they got 4-minute penalties, and especially looking at Patrick Lang's race, you just kind of feel like, was it worth it to get a penalty? Did he just gain 4 minutes by drafting or by being in the pack? It's always an interesting question. I mean, I'm on the side of like, if you get a penalty, if you were drafting, the penalty needs to be a lot harder than 4 minutes. 4 minutes just makes the risk reward scale tip towards risking it, and I don't think that's a good thing.
I mean, there was a bunch that got penalties in the first, like on the way out to Javi on the first half, and yeah, as you said, Lang, Van Lier and McMahon were in amongst those 4. I mean, that totally changed the race for most of them. But yeah, I mean, on one hand, you look at the gap between Lang and Frodeno, and you're thinking, 4 minutes puts him pretty close to Frodo if he was to come off the bike together. However, as you say, like, is this calculation in the sense of how much energy did he potentially save for how long? I mean, we don't know the exact circumstance unless, I don't know if you saw it. Probably not. They probably saw the penalty being when it was, but I think it was also early enough during the ride that he would have had to spend a good amount of energy on the second half without the benefit of being in that group. But of course, there's other groups that form. So,
there's other group, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so you never know. I mean, he did have a fantastic run, 2:39. I don't see too many sub 2:40s. So that was a very quick run, and certainly it had an impact on Vin Laird, and McMahon never came back into it. So yeah, I mean that set the tone. I mean, we always end up sort of talking and looking at watching the race, and you see this huge front group, and they're all looking to be right at the limit of the drafting gap. And I mean, inevitably there's guys that drift into that or make errors passing or when they're passed. Once again, we see just such a huge advantage of being in that front group generally, though. I think we talked last time about, when we talk about 70.3 worlds, but these championships, you've got to swim in the front. And, if you don't, it's such a disadvantage. And, again, the sort of the Lionel Sanders type athlete, if you're not there, you can spend a huge amount of energy trying to get there. And as we saw, that had a significant cost on his race with him, you really just blowing up on the run and not able to run, what you might expect.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. The draft, the pack dynamics are huge. The deal here is that when you have a pack I think at one point that front pack had 24 riders, maybe like going through like the later stages, going out on the Queen K, maybe Waikoloa on that section, and when you have a pack that big going that fast, the only thing that you can do is just if you roll into the draft zone of the guy in front of you, you either just start coasting or you break. But what you're never going to do is, I got into the drafting and I got into the drafting area of the guy in front of me, and now I have to go around the whole pack, so I'm going to have to lead. One effort like that, it might be the end of your race right there. So everybody's just going on that yo-yo where they're at 12, 10, 9, coast, go back to 12, and the officials are not going to call that every time it happens. What the officials are going to call is consistently being inside the draft zone, really close. And so ends up being that everyone on average is closer than 12 meters, even for a little bit. And that's a big advantage when it comes to everybody else.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, and this hasn't changed really in a long time. Perhaps just the front pack's gotten bigger, and there's also, as I think we've discussed, this sort of the media effect of all of these motorcycles and cars and trying to get images and, depending on the wind, etc. I mean, that can also have a significant impact on the speed of that front group and not being there. And, and of course, everyone, it's not a surprise. I mean, this is the evolution of championship races. And I think we exchanged some messages during the race, about the numbers of athletes. And, there's kind of been like, a movement about, for example, the discrepancy between the number of women pros and the number of men, and to even them out. But I think the argument is probably better the other direction in terms of not adding more women but having fewer men, and that would perhaps create a different dynamic here, perhaps not substantially different, but make, if we had, say, 25 and 25, I think that would make for an interesting race.
Yeah, hashtag 35 men to Kona. I definitely agree with that. I think that the certainly, like, I think the men's race would improve if we had shorter numbers, and And I mean, it's not hard for you to realize that when you go and see the last athletes that are getting into Kona. These are not athletes that are just out there being world beaters. That athletes that just show up and win an Ironman or win a 70.3. They're usually athletes that are, let's call it like top 5 at Ironman, and maybe top 10 at 70.3. So they're really good athletes. But I think that if we're going to go just like with the best and coming from a situation that we know that with less numbers, the competition would be enhanced. I think that having a race with a lot less men would greatly enhance the quality of the race.
Yeah, I think absolutely would, and and really what we're talking about is making the perhaps the front group smaller or more gaps through the race, and sometimes those gaps can be really significant to the amount of energy spent. Again, if you look at the swim, there's some pretty big gaps at various points, and if you're on the wrong side of that, it's going to be tough. And I think for sure on the male versus female, I mean, there should be equal numbers. It's ridiculous that there's not, but yeah, I think potentially smaller fields might be interesting. And I mean, the whole should pros even do Kona? And is there enough? Does it really make sense considering 11th place doesn't have any prize money? Mm-hmm. We talked last time about the whole circus and all that. The reasons why many pros want to be or need to be in Kona, but for many it just doesn't really make a lot of sense from a performance point of view. As you said, the field is sort of filled up on some respects with athletes that are qualifying sort of in the back half of that qualification. After the June, July Ironmans, then there's still more coming with points where you can get a place by continuing to race. Whereas some of the other athletes that maybe at that point they know they've not got it done and they don't want to have so many races going into Kona, so they change the objective and they maybe pick an autumn Ironman where they can make some money and get ahead for the next year. I mean, in terms of the qualification strategy. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you tend to find a number of athletes on the start line who kind of got in via that route. Which is also pretty tough to get a performance out in that case. So, one thing that I would add to that is that having less athletes in Kona, it's also a feature of racing in Kona, because the number of athletes that can be competitive in Kona is more reduced than the number of athletes that can be competitive in a location that's going to have less extreme conditions. So basically, from those athletes that qualify for Kona, a few of them qualify for Kona while not being good athletes in Kona. So that makes the number of athletes that can be competitive in Kona, they're going to be a lot less, and at the same time. And that's why it makes sense to have a reduced field. If we had a world championship that would be somewhere else, then we could have a situation where more athletes would be competitive in a situation where with different weather conditions, and then it might make sense to have like larger fields, but I don't think that in Kona it makes doesn't make a lot of sense to have so many athletes, and that's as we're going to discuss next, it's even a bigger factor in the women's race. Yeah, I mean just on that point, the environmental conditions just don't suit everybody. It's when we talked about Cozumel Grand Final, if it was there every year in those kind of conditions, then with some athletes, like Johnny Brownlee, that would just struggle in those conditions. Might get better over time, but there's some athletes that heat is funny like that. There's you can acclimatize, but there's just some people that their physiology doesn't allow them to perform in those conditions, and it's also extremely unforgiving. If things go sideways, in Kona, you end up walking, and there's no coming back from that, really, at least from a competitive point of view. Once things go wrong.
That's actually a pretty funny hypothetical scenario where we just can you imagine that if we were sitting here and just saying that oh, Jonathan Brownlee, yeah, sure, he's a good athlete, but he never came through on the big stage, In the case that if we had the grand final or world championships, ITU always in Cozumel, just he's okay, but he never came through in the big stage. He's maybe not that good.
Exactly. So the women, really the Daniela Riff show, her against the clock was perhaps in the end what it ended up being, but we haven't seen a dominating performance like that in a while. Quick take on Daniela and the women's race.
Quick take is oof.
Oof for everyone else.
It was just a crazy dominating performance. I promised myself that on the podcast I would not compare it to any other performance that I've seen in Kona, and I won't. It was just an eye opener, and one thing that was striking was her levels of energy at the finish line, where she ran through the finish line. She was jumping around. She had a lot more in the tank. That's what I got from there. So yeah, it was an eye-opening performance.
Yeah, still with the fastest run after really riding what it looked like about 8 minutes faster than the next woman. What can you say? And I guess that of course she was the defending champion. However, her year wasn't as dominating perhaps as other years, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. And the most obvious one that she referenced was not having really been at her best at 70.3 Worlds, and perhaps having some doubts about that. And then she did the back-to-back Ironmans in the summer. So there was always perhaps a question mark, but certainly that's erased following that performance. It's perhaps a Chrissy Wellington at her best type performance, but having looking at the breakdown of the race, it was really the second half of the ride where, the real differentiation started coming in, because we still had a group coming into Hawi. Mm-hmm. But even just kind of backing up again to the swim, we don't see the same density of the women's swim in terms of the fastest swim. There's quite a range there. Even just Daniela 52, 50, Rini 56, 44, and Heather Jackson in third and 58. So quite a big range just right there in the swim. And I guess that's fairly typical, but it does illustrate sort of the different patterns that we see in the women's race, where you can still be, even in the top 10, we've got an athlete as slow as just about 10 minutes slower than Daniela on the swim, where the range is much smaller on the men's, where it's a different dynamic. The front group is not nearly as big, and as we saw, it really just splintered on the way up to Hawi even.
Yeah, the dynamics of the race for the women were pretty similar to previous years. It seems that there's that pack of good swimmers that rides very strongly at the beginning of the bike. It seems that a lot of those riders have typically difficulties in backing it up and having a good run. This year was pretty much the same women that were on that pack. Pretty much, Jodie Swallow, Mary Beth Ellis, Kessler, Alicia Kay, and I'm probably missing a few more on that pack. Had trouble running well off that strong bike. It seemed that Daniela was biding her time in the first half of the ride, and then she on the way back to T2, she just put the hammer down and just put a huge amount of time on everyone. And then again, like last year, we had a situation where the best runners or the bad swimmers, okay riders, good runners just came through the field, and that was the case for Latonen, which was a bit of a surprise, but also obviously Jackson and Piano or Piampano. I can't remember how, or I don't know how to pronounce it, and it was ended up being like dynamics. The dynamics of the race were pretty similar to last year. It was good to see. Marinda just come back and have a very strong performance, but obviously on a different time zone than Riff.
And Rooney made a comment, I think, well, today perhaps when we're recording this, that just making the analysis of the race, and you think, how do you be better? How do you close that gap? And it's a pretty daunting gap for the women if you have ambitions of winning the race, and you get out swam, out biked, and doesn't happen very often for Marinda, but getting outrun even. That's very tough. That's a tough standard, and perhaps it comes back to the classic Kona question, I think, which is racing the field, racing your race, or well, as you say, some of the women that kind of were out in that pack early on the bike and then weren't able to back up a good run versus saving something or pacing the bike a bit better and then having a solid run. I mean, there was a number of women that just had solid runs, kind of perhaps more balanced races, and ended up running themselves into the top 10 or are really well, for Rinny up in the second, but even just going down through the top 10, and you can just see some of the rides were not quite as quick, but perhaps better balanced races versus getting caught up in trying to chase. And some of that is the fact of, well, if you don't swim as fast, you don't have the carrot in front of you. But there's still that what's the best way to race in Kona? Do you really have to keep control over yourself for as long as possible, as you said earlier, to avoid just the wheels coming off and slowing down so much on the back half of the run?
Yeah, definitely. For the women, we've been seeing a pattern of those swimmer riders just not being able to run, and definitely it comes across that at least from the outside, that everybody ended up riding too hard, particularly in the beginning of the bike. So what's coming across is that those riders that end up riding their races and riding with groups on that when that fits their race plan are getting better outcomes than those that just go with the pack.
And it's a tough one too. Then when you roll into kind of the next year, a good finish in Kona makes such a difference to the next year already. In terms of the number of races you've got to do, and of course, like all ranking systems, I mean, the better you perform, the less this stuff matters. But there's certainly a factor with the duration of Ironman and the number of races, versus preparation. You don't really want to have to travel and go off and race too much to get on the start line next year, because it'd have an adverse impact. So, the risks or the penalty, if you like, for blowing up are really quite significant for the next year.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's interesting is that particularly on the women's side, it's what's the women that are focusing more on Kona are definitely performing better at Kona. And you see, as an example, Mirinda's a good example of that, where she realized that once you win Kona, basically only Kona matters, and only winning again matters, and she basically just focuses again every year just in Kona and on racing well in Kona, and pretty much like every race that she does is secondary to that objective, and other athletes, and obviously Heather is counts among those examples where there's a few different goals to the season, and one of them is Kona, and for those athletes, it seems that it's harder to compete with the athletes that are totally focused on racing in Kona. So I think this separation, is going to increase in the next few years in athletes that are purely Ironman driven athletes, and then athletes that are they're going to be more 70.3 oriented, because or athletes that are Ironman focused but primarily Kona focused, and athletes that are 70.3 focused, because competing in Kona nowadays, particularly for the women, means that you really have to put all your baskets in the Kona, all your eggs in the Kona basket, and some athletes simply don't want to do that, or they can't afford it, because you have to have a pretty good life situation in terms of sponsors or money in the bank or any other factors that's going to allow you to just stay home the whole season and train, and then just do a few races and then race Kona.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, balance between racing full distance and that being the focus, and therefore it's pretty much Kona or the regional championships, and how much focus do you put on the regional championships versus doing both. I'm sure between both full races and 70.3, I'm sure somebody's done an analysis of who performed well in the
hopefully a good analysis
in the Mooloolaba 70.3 world champs, and backed up a good Kona versus ones that I think it depends where you are in your career and where you are in your development as an athlete, how much you can do both. And even your own kind of physiological profile of how much experience you have, how good you are in the various elements in order to be able to do both and do both well versus the total focus. But we do see that specialization, as you said, and it's an interesting path for age group athletes, elite athletes, when thinking about what's the career pathway. How do you move through being a professional, and what does it mean? And I often talk about should you even be in Kona, and many people want to get there. So, but I think that's we can go into that in another
let's move
episode.
Forward. Joel, let's move forward here, because I hate Kona.
But we should talk about the age group drafting. How about that? A perennial evergreen topic, just as much as the front group on the bike in Kona. But inevitably every year we see some photos of huge packs and peloton on the Queen K of the age groups, and this year was no different. And the whole classic what can you tell from a still photo versus video, and let the marshals do their job, etc. But I think
let me tell you that from the pictures that I saw, I could tell a lot from the pictures that I saw.
I mean, there hardly looks any room on the road for anybody. And I think, it's just I reckon it's the commercialization of Kona, it's the huge draw for WTC, and they want people to go to the races to try to qualify, and they put more and more on the pier, as it were, and more and more on the road then. And I think I saw there was about 2,300. And, perhaps that's just too many for this course. especially when it's, we just had the same discussion about making the pro field smaller. Could we drop about 1,000 age groupers and make this a bit more fair race?
Yeah, probably that could happen with a smaller field. I think would make a difference. But but to go a little back,